Hey you guys, it's Dani. Welcome back to my wrap up of 2019. Today we're talking books. So we're going to talk a little bit about the books that I read, that I liked, that I didn't finish in 2019, as well as a few that are on my to be read list of 2020. I consider myself an average reader. I try to read at least one book a month. Sometimes I'll skip it and then I'll cram other months. But I try to take in as much as I can because I enjoy it. And now that I've gotten into audiobooks, I find it even easier to consume these novels and stories and things of that nature. So in 2019, I read 27 books, 3 of which I did not finish. So let me talk a little bit about those. My first one was The Trauma Cleaner. I didn't finish that one. It was about an older woman who cleaned up crime scenes. It was a nonfiction. I read a couple of other ones that were very similar to that genre this year. One of which is Stiff by Mary Roach. This was recommended to me after reading Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, which is by Caitlin Doughty, about her time at the crematorium and things like that, and becoming a mortician and stuff. Stiff was a fascinating book about human cadavers, right? So the curious lives of human cadavers. And it talked a lot about people who donated their body to science and kind of what those bodies are doing in their afterlife. And it was so interesting and so unique. So I was on a kind of kick of reading those kind of books. And when I got to The Trauma Cleaner, I thought I was really going to enjoy it. And it wasn't so bad. But I maybe got 2 or 3 chapters in and I kind of lost interest. And so I just kind of put it down and never picked it back up. I wouldn't say it's a bad book. Now, this is by Sara Krasnostein. I could be saying that wrong. But it was okay. I just didn't follow through. It didn't hold up to the other ones that I read like that. Stiff being my favorite. The second one that I did not finish was Cell by Stephen King. Now, I'm a huge Stephen King fan. I read 1 or 2 of his books every year. This year I read, I read this one and a few more I'll get into. I put it down. This is the second time I did not finish this book. The first time was a couple years ago. I have my copy up in my bookshelf. I started to read it. I got a few chapters in. I kind of put it down. I was like, meh. But I came across it again this year and I grabbed it and I was like, no, I'm going to read it. And I made it almost to the end. Almost to the end. But I didn't finish. I didn't finish again. And it's not a bad story. I kind of want to put that out there. This is not a bad story. But it's more basic. So, Cell, okay. People using cell phones. Something went off. Anyone using their cell phone got this wavelength in their brain. They started becoming very aggressive and animal-like. Almost like a zombie type idea. And there became this hive mind going on. It had great elements. There were people trying to survive and finding each other and making this kind of little groups and packs along the way. People trying to find their loved ones, and there was almost like a king within the hive. I don't know. It was okay. But again, there was something that just was holding me back. I don't know if it just wasn't interesting enough. I felt like I knew it was happening already. I don't know. It just wasn't it, you guys. It just wasn't it. So, sorry, I didn't finish this one. My last one that I didn't finish, and I really tried, I really tried, was Doomed by Chuck Palahniuk. I love him just like I love Stephen King. I read his books quite often. I don't like it. I own this book. I'm sorry, my glare is pretty bad. This white book. I own this book. I've had it forever. It is still on my bedside. But I'm not gonna finish it. I'm just not. It is the second book of his Damned series. So I read Damned. It was difficult. But I got through it. It was fine. I don't care for the main character's voice. Chuck usually has really great first-person narrators. Like, their voice is unique. I love the way they speak. I love the way they act. I love their point of view. Like, all of his stuff that I've read has been so interesting in the way that he writes in the first person. We have such really interesting narrators. But this one, this 13-year-old girl is just so difficult to read. She's so difficult to like, you guys. And I normally like a character that's not super awesome. You know what I mean? I don't mind liking to dislike a character. But it's so silly. It's like, and maybe maybe that's what he was going for, and maybe that's kind of the whole point of it. But like, her voice kind of describes hell. It's like if you would have told a 13-year-old about hell, who was like a spoiled brat, didn't know much about life, didn't know much about anything, and you were like, oh, describe hell to me, what would you see in hell? And it's exactly what you would expect. Just kind of weird poop stuff, like vomit rivers and things like I don't know. It's too much. It's too much. And again, this is something that I've tried to read more than once. It's still by my bedside. Maybe I'll get through it one day, but like, I don't know if I'm going to put myself through it just to say that I finished it. I just don't like her voice. I don't like her character. Do not read. That was what's just going to end up happening, right? So those were my did not finish books. So on to what else I read this year. I did read a few young adult series, or like bits and pieces of the series. Like I did start the Lunar Chronicles. This is by Melissa. Hold on, I have her name. Melissa Meyer. I read Cinder, and then I read Scarlet, and I kind of stopped there. I think my next one was Crest, and I started it, but I had a lot going on, and I never got to finish it, and it was something that I got from my library. So it's not that I didn't want to finish it, it's just that I sent it back because there was a lot of people waiting for it. It was on hold. So I was like, I'm not going to keep it if I can't finish reading it. So I put it back. I literally got to maybe the second page. Like I opened it up and then that was about it. I don't find that one was terrible. It was kind of interesting because it's about the fairy tales, right? We're meeting up with a Cinderella type character, with a Red Riding Hood type character, and then I think we go into like Rapunzel, but there's like an overlying storyline that kind of goes through and how they meet each other. So I definitely think that's one I'm going to revisit or like continue on for 2020. They're not going to be high on my list, but I feel like if I need some stuff to kind of fill, or if I want to maybe listen to some, that's going to be a series that I might get into. Now, I did read the Sarah Holland Everless series, which was Everless and Evermore. It was really a good story. I don't know if I like the way it ended though. It wasn't a terrible ending by any means, but like I wanted more from it. I felt like the story that was created, the world that was created, the turmoil and the political nature of what was going on in this world was fascinating. It was fascinating. But I feel like trying to wrap it up in 2 books was the downfall. There could have been so much more to this story. I just feel like it ended too soon. And then saying that maybe if they did have a 3rd book, it would have like, oh, it went too far. You know, you can never, I don't know, you can't please everybody, right? But I just felt like I wanted to know more about certain things, and it just kind of fell flat at the end. But all in all, I still say it's worth the read, and I don't regret reading it at all. I did really enjoy it. Another young adult that I read, I want to see if there's any other ones. Another series that I finished up was from Victoria Aveyard, and that was the War Storm. So that was the Red Queen. Here we go. Can you see it? So it was the Red Queen series. I was like, what are the other ones? Glass Sword, King's Cage, and War Storm. I did finish out that collection. I did really like it. It was pretty good. I found that it ended well. It was fine. It was a good series in the middle. Like the last book I felt was okay. Like I'm not upset with it, but it's not like the best ending I've ever had. You know what I mean? It was just a really good series and worth reading. Because while it was YA, I felt like, again, you're in the same kind of political turmoil as like Hunger Games, right? It's just that really interesting parallel between like us and them that I just really loved. I just like that world setting. I just find it really, really interesting. So I love the world that it created. So that was a good series, the Red Queen series. Now, one book that I really enjoyed was The Hazelwood by Melissa Elbert. It was like this kind of dark fairy tale kind of vibe, very interesting, caught me right away. I loved the tone and the voice of our main character, and really excited. They are coming out, it's on my to be read list with the second part, or like another tale from The Hazelwood, which I'll talk about in a few. But this was a great one, and one of my last ones that I read that were like young adult. So that was a really good one. So on to my next kind of genre that I read, which was true crime. I read a few true crime books, and one kind of like true crime slash biographical or autobiographical book, which was Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered, which is like one of the podcasts that I listen to. The girls that run that podcast wrote a book, and they talk a bit about their true crime obsession, so I kind of count it as that mainly. But true crime books that I actually read were I'll Be Gone in the Dark, which was my favorite. I would have to say my favorite true crime book of all time. I'll Be Gone in the Dark was written by Michelle McNamara, who passed away a couple years ago, and it was such a good book. I devoured it. It's about the Golden State Killer. My top #1 book of true crime of 2019 and really of all time. I love the way that she wrote. I loved her voice. I liked the way that they finished it for her, because she wasn't finished when she passed away. And then kind of getting the ending with them being on tour for the book, and they found arrested the Golden State Killer. It was so satisfying, you know? That was a really good one. I also read, The Stranger Beside Me. I was like, please come out. The Stranger Beside Me, which was Anne Rule. And everyone talks about how amazing writer Anne Rule is, and it is very good. However, I felt that The Stranger Beside Me was less than I wanted it to be. Like, I found it was like, I don't know, I read it in a day. I didn't find there was much substance to it. And hearing everyone talk about it and how much they loved it and how interesting they found it, I don't know. But then again, Ted Bundy just doesn't do it for me as a true crime thing. Like, he's just, I don't know. I just think he's a jackass. He's a douchebag. And I don't really give a shit about him. I think he was less than spectacular. He went around murdering women and then pretended to be this, you know, holier than thou kind of person, so put together, this young Republican. It was just so, like, I don't know. He's not my favorite to learn about, to read about, but I really wanted to read Anne Rule's book, and I was very underwhelmed, to say the least. But The Fact of a Body, which was Alexandria Marzano-Lesnevich, was so good. It was disturbing in parts. It made me sick to my stomach in other parts. And it was another one that was like true crime, but autobiographical. And it gave me all the feels. It was a really good book, and I'm really glad that I read that book. So, moving on to my last few that I just want to talk about. I'm not going to talk about each and every book, obviously. But my last little genre that I want to talk about is my, like, self-help type books. One of my favorites was Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. This had a lot to do with vulnerability, and I listened to this book. I really enjoyed hearing her speak about these things, because that's what it felt like. It almost felt like listening to a TED Talk, right? Listening to kind of someone break it down for you. And I really did enjoy listening to this book. It's one that I feel like I'd want to listen to again, because there were so many good parts and there was so much that I got out of it that I really enjoyed it. Another one I talked about all last year. Y'all know this. Big Magic, top of the list. Top of the list. It is, I read it 3 times last year, whatever. In 2019, I read it 3 times. It's so good. I'm likely to read it again. I'm likely to read different passages again, because it just sparked me in so many ways and made me feel like, oh, yes, duh. You know what I mean? Like, why don't I think like this? Or why do I let these things get to me and just, like, let shit go? You know what I mean? So good. Last one. Okay. Okay. I did not know who Rachel Hollis was, so I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into. I don't think I would have even read this if I knew who she was, and I know that sounds really shitty, but it's true. So I did not know that this was like an uber Christian vibe to it. I just thought it looked very interesting. You know, stop believing the lies about who you are so you can become who you were meant to be. Girl, wash your face. I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. It sounds fun. I want to read it. And I'm going to be honest, there are some parts I really loved. And then when it got to some of the other things where she was like, I'm a good Christian woman and I do this and God is blah, 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 and you need to scripture and blah. I'm like, oh, pump the brakes. Like, I just didn't know. I just didn't know. And the thing is like, it's easy to separate because it's not a lot. However, her as a person and like her telling her stories telling the lies that she believed, and kind of how she fixed them, and like certain things about her stories. I don't know. It was hard to relate to some of the things. The concept was good. Her motivation behind it and certain aspects of it were good, but there were some parts that were just really unrelatable, and they were very I don't know. Yeah. So, last time I'm talking about some Stephen King. So I read the can't talk today, y'all. The Shawshank Redemption. I read The Shining. The Shining has been my favorite movie, and I was always really scared to read the book because I'm like, I really love the movie and I just don't want it to ruin it. But it didn't. It just made it better. It just made the whole concept better. I love them both completely separately because, like, what was done in the movie, now I'm talking about the Jack Nicholson movie, Stanley Kubrick film, not the new whatever. That film by itself was just so interesting, and I freaking loved it. But then reading The Shining and seeing the characters in a completely different way, understanding what's going on at the Overlook in a completely different way was, loved it. Shawshank Redemption, I found went hand in hand. It's been one of my favorite movies forever. Again, another one that I was like, I guess I'll read the book. But I just found that they really met in the middle. They all seemed, or like the whole thing seemed very cohesive. There wasn't like, oh, that didn't happen, or, oh, what's going on here? It felt very on par, and I enjoyed it altogether. And then there was it. So I've tried to read this before, but I was like too overwhelmed. I was like, I can't do this. So I grabbed the audiobook. 40 hours later. Oh my God. It was crazy. I binge listened. But I listen to my books on 2 times speed because it has to go faster. I'm not going to pay attention. I have to be listening, you know? So it took forever. I did enjoy the book, but I'm not going to spoil it because if you are interested in reading it, I recommend reading it. But I will say the end, when you find out like what they did as kids, it was so uncomfortable. And you're not going to have that alluded to. At least I'm 99% sure because I've seen the other ones, like the new one and the old movie. I just haven't seen the second part of the new one. But that's when they're adults. I strongly doubt they're going to allude to what happened because it's so awkward and so inappropriate. It was a little much. It was a little much. Yeah, that's what I'm going to say about that. So I did read Stephen King. It was really good. A little inappropriate. This, though, Sleeping Beauties by Stephen King and Owen King is probably the favorite of the year. I read it early, I believe in January. Let me double check. I believe it was in January. Yeah. I read this in January, and it stuck with me. Out of all the fiction that I read this year, this was my favorite. And I think out of all the books that I read, this was my favorite. It had so much going on. Like, you had the ones that are sleeping, the people that are awake, the ones that are, you know, trying to hunt this down, the ones that are trying to protect. There were such a great storylines in each one of these different places that kind of all came together. It was a spectacular story, and I didn't know what I was going into. I'd seen the cover, I'd seen the book in a few different places, but I never knew what it was about. I never really knew anything. And then I read the description and I was like, I'm probably not gonna like this. I'll start it, see if I like it. I'll continue on or I won't. I got hooked. It was so interesting. I want to see a movie about it. I want to see more. I want to know more. I just want to go there again. So this, Sleeping Beauties, was my favorite book of 2019, for sure. So, let's wrap this up. Let's talk a little bit about what's on my to-be-read list for 2020. And I'm going to start with The Night Country, because this is the second Hazelwood novel, and I'm really pumped to see where this goes. It was such an interesting concept. It was such a good story that I don't really care where this is going. I just want to read it. I just hope it's as good, you know? I don't like to do many spoilers. I don't like to read a whole lot about the books that I'm anxious to read, if that makes sense, because there are some books I just don't want to know. I just want to devour the book itself and then, you know, go from there. A lot of times I will read books and then go see what people are saying about it, if they feel the same way I do, or if they were like, what the hell, you know, and kind of read their theories and their things about it. So I haven't spoiled myself. I have no idea what this is about. I just know that it's a continuation or a story from it, and I'm about it. I'm so about it. The second thing that's actually in my Kindle right now, or in my, you know, library book, what is it called? My app to read, is Everything is Fucked, a book about hope. This is Mark Manson. Now, I read The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck 2 years ago, or a year ago, something like that, and I really enjoyed it. So this is his new book, and that is on my to-be-read list. It's actually in my queue, so I'm super pumped to read this, just because I just like his style, and it's fun, and there are just some interesting things that get sparked, right? Oh, that's it for that. A couple of other ones that I have is one that I've already kind of started, but I've been like starting and stopping. I kept putting it back on my shelf because I would get distracted. But this is on my to-be-read list. This is one that I want to read this year, and that's The Witch's Book of Self-Care. Magical ways to pamper, soothe, and care for your body and spirit. That's kind of like my big thing for this year, is true self-care. It's something that I've always strived to do, but always fell off the horse, like, and just kind of went off. And last year was terrible for it. Terrible for it. So we're going to try again, and we're going to do much better this year. So I do want to have this on my list, and keep this on my bedside and really dive into it this year. Hopefully it's really good. I've been seeing it a lot around since it came out. And so, I'm excited to read this one. Another one that I already have set came in just yesterday, and it's called Muse with the Moon. This is by Joe Caldrick. It says, spark your creativity and self-reflection with the help of the lunar cycle. This is a beautiful book. It's soft, and basically you go with, and there's all kinds of different activities to do with the moon cycle. So I am starting it now, like reading the main stuff, like how to use this book, your materials that you'll need, and then it starts with the new moon and kind of brings you through. So for a whole cycle, starting on, what is it, the 20, hold please. The 24th of January, the new moon starts, so that's when I will start with this book, because you start with the new moon and you kind of go from there. So I plan to have this done with the moon, and I hope that it goes really well. I'm excited to see how it kind of plays out. I love books like this, so that's on my to be read. And so that's where I'm starting 2020. And that's where I went in 2019. I'm hoping to get at least 25 books read this year. That's kind of my minimum. My main goal, though, is 30. I'd really like to hit 30. So, we'll see how that goes. So I hope you enjoyed, guys. Let me know if you've read any of these books. Let me know if you recommend any books. I love hearing those things. Thank you to the ones that recommended stuff last year. Like I said, Stiff was one that I started reading because of a viewer. The Cinder ones I read. There was quite a few. So thank you so much for recommending books. I'm going to be talking a lot more about them this year. And I will see you guys very soon. I'm sending you all my love. If you're looking for me, all my links are down below, as well as a list of the books that we talked about today. And I will talk to you guys very soon. Later, Gators.